Okay, hello everyone. Settler's Lament here again with John Fisher and the 21st Reaction. And today, the title of the stream is The Consequences of Vaush. Now, the main topic of the stream is going to be morality. What is morality? What's the Catholic approach to morality? That type of stuff. And in particular, we will also be contrasting that to other moral theories. This is one of those times when I have tricked my guest here, John Fisher, into doing all the work for me. So he's going to do most of the heavy lifting here. I'd like to start this off, though, also by saying that everyone here, John Fisher, 21st Reaction, of course, me, all have YouTube channels. So, I mean, if you're here, you're hopefully already subscribed to mine. But make sure you're subscribed to John Fisher's and 21st Reactions channel. The links for both of those are in the description.
Yep. And if you are interested, I have an ongoing series on Lumen Gentium, which I am doing. And I also have a Medium where I blog, mostly on sacramentology as of recently. If you guys want to investigate whether or not the Council of Florence erred or made a theological mistake when it said that the instrument of ordination is the chalice and the paten rather than the laying on of hands, you could just go to my my Medium page. It's Saint John Fisher .medium so forth.
Okay. I don't know. Reaction, you gonna say anything?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, hopefully some people have seen me in the streams recently. I made a new video predicting some developments about the near, 5-10 year future of our societies, where progressivism is going to go. So check that out, and glad to be on stream again.
Yeah. So like I said, John, you're going to do most of the heavy lifting here. So, what would you how would you like to start this?
You're muted.
Oh, my apologies. So I'd first like to start off by making a distinction between metaethics, normative ethics, and practical ethics. So metaethics is probably what we're more concerned about. It's what is morality. When we say something is good or bad, right or wrong, what do those words even mean, if anything? And normative ethics is how do we find out what is right or wrong? So this is where we would get into things like consequentialism versus deontology. Deontology is thinking of morality as a specific set of rules and dictates that we are to follow, and that we get these strict rules by means of either maybe pure reason or looking at nature, something like that. Consequentialism, on the other hand, says that the way to find out about whether an action is right or wrong is whether or not it gets us to a specific end. So, for example, happiness, people fulfilling their desires, maybe something a little more nebulous like social flourishing or something like that. Then you're dealing with a consequentialist ethic. Now, metaethics is about whether or not something being right or wrong is objective or subjective, whether it is true despite everyone's personal preferences, or whether or not it is something true in and of itself, whether or not someone says it, or what, and how these laws might be absolute or very particular. So, for example, some people say that every circumstance warrants its own moral right or wrong answer, whereas other people say some actions can be absolutely right or wrong in any and all circumstances. So these would be some things that people on the metaethical side are probably going to be looking at. So it's possible one could be a consequentialist, but also hold to an objective morality. G.E. Moore is a famous British consequentialist who held something along these lines. He said that the good isn't something which is definable, it's ineffable, and it's something that's just intuitive, that we just get properly. You don't need some kind of syllogism to know that skinning babies alive, for example, is absolutely wrong in all circumstances. It's just intuitively the case. Just like you can't really break down what your experience of the color green is. Yet we all know what green is when we probably think about it, so long as our senses are working fine. And he was still a consequentialist. He said, what is the good? If the good is something which we ought to want, then shouldn't we be maximizing that? And if maximizing the good is what consequentialism is, count me a consequentialist. So you could be both a consequentialist and a moral realist, someone who holds to objective morality, but you seldomly see it. Everyone's hackneyed response to morality is, oh, it's all about my personal preferences and happiness and how I can maximize that by making agreements with other people. So yeah, our focus is going to be metaethics.
Okay. So how is it, I suppose, that we know morality is even a real thing? Because, I mean, I don't see morality. I don't feel morality. So why do you have these like stupid, outdated, Stone Age beliefs that there's some like mystical moral law that exists?
Right. So my ethics is mostly based on my love for one particular scholastic philosopher who I absolutely adore, John Duns Scotus. A great introduction to his thought can be found in this book, Great Medieval Thinkers, Duns Scotus by Richard Cross. And another philosopher who's a Protestant, but I actually think makes some pretty good insights is John E. Hare. He also takes a lot from Scotus as well. Although I'd probably be a little more skeptical of him. I do like to think of Scotus in his more scholastic context, but in any case, there's a Muslim philosopher by the name of Ibn Sina, and he said, if somebody denies the law of non-contradiction, I am going to beat him and I am going to burn him until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as to not be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as to not be burned. And I actually think that's a pretty good philosophy for life. If you can't make sense of you getting beaten and burned and starved, then you probably don't really have a good philosophy. Duns Scotus basically says the same thing. He takes Ibn Sina and he applies it to the contingency argument, and he says, if somebody doesn't believe in the difference between something being contingent and something being necessary, then you can beat and burn him until he admits that it is not necessary that he be beaten and that it is not necessary that he be burned. In fact, he's probably going to say, stop burning me, stop beating me, because he thinks that it is a contingent state of affairs. It can stop. It doesn't necessarily have to be like this. Morality, I think, works the same way. If what's good for the gander there is good here.
Well, okay. I mean, I know what a big-brained moral nihilist would say. They'd just say, well, I have a preference to not be beaten and burned. But
I have a preference to beat you and burn you. Where are we at now?
No, yeah, I mean, a consistent moral nihilist would say like, exactly that. There's the only reason that we shouldn't do beating and burning is because it won't really make society work very well. But there's nothing like
I don't care about what society. I don't care about what society wants, and that's what it boils down to. Escaping to society is basically their version of escaping to a higher power. Society. Like, if you can't make sense of everything aside from thinking of it at its atomic roots, at individuals disconnected from one another, maybe forming something better, then this society is basically an abstraction. At that point in time, I'm here, you're there, I'm beating, you're getting beat, and that's it. As far as I understand it, I don't have to listen to some nebulous, abstract society. I have this preference. Every nihilist might think of this in the theoretical, oh, I just have a preference. But when it comes down to it, in that experience, you are going to be thinking, he shouldn't be doing it. Why is he doing this? There's something wrong with this individual, as if there should be something right with this individual, as if there is a behavior that he ought to follow. So I don't really think the challenge of moral anti-realism is that great. I think that when push comes to shove, if your theory can't make sense out of your desire not to be beaten and burned, and out of your want for this other person to heed his conscience and care about what the good is, then it's really not worth considering. I really don't care one way or another. Like, everyone has a pet theory. Everyone can think in the abstract, of course, the law of non-contradiction has some exceptions. But when you're getting beaten and burned, you're not thinking theoretically there. Yeah, sure, maybe some things can contradict and others can, but as I understand it, no. Your experiences make far greater sense of things than you just thinking in your abstract philosophical chair. And as I see it, moral nihilism is not worth considering just for that alone.
Yeah, I suppose sort of one of the linchpins on this is that though I have, I suppose, seen some relatively consistent moral nihilists, the main way that they can never be consistent is when they actually start talking about things that they dislike. That they never really stick to just the preference language. It quickly turns into them using very moralizing language that shouldn't really make any sense with their philosophy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And just you have to look at how they react. You have because when it comes to thinking theoretically, we could always bracket off those things, but really, your common sense is basically there to tell you how the world is, and in what way is it governed, and in what is there to learn about the world. Common sense, I think, holds ground for moral realism pretty nicely. So I would start with common sense and just go off there. And if someone doesn't want to listen to their common sense, like, what am I going to do? Nothing. If you could ignore that, then you can ignore me.
We have examples of the oh, is my mic terrible? Yeah, we have examples of actual nihilists acting. Of course, like Vaush. I was listening to a guy called Perspective Philosophy. I think that's the name, or Perspective Philosophy. And he's left wing, but he's big on the philosophy stuff. And he was talking to Destiny about Vaush because Vaush has all these cringe quote unquote debates with Destiny, and he identifies him as an epistemic anti-realist, which basically just means, to put it simply, reality don't real, and you are just pursuing your self-satisfaction. Basically, it is basically Satanism, but sorry, but it's just an ideal of there isn't any objective value or meaning to action. It is just about maximizing utility. Even language isn't really about trying to express some kind of higher truth. It's fully used as an instrument, as a function to get somewhere. So that's an example. So Vaush is an example of one of those nihilists that isn't, just in a closet being self-defeating. How they get around it is that the only meaning they have is my feelings, my personal desire, and that's why even itself, nihilism or whatever this is, it's not even true to itself. He's not being honest even about being a nihilist, because they get around to it actually just being their own preferences as the sole source of meaning. If they were an actual nihilist, then they would be self-defeating, but they're not.
Mm-hmm. Very much. I mean, everyone likes to borrow. As much as I'm not a huge fan of these philosophical gotcha games, like, sure, I don't believe in epistemic truth, but you do, and that's why I can borrow this stuff from you and throw it right back at you. But at that point in time, if you don't agree with me at the starting point, then what's the point of dialoguing? Like, usually a dialogue is to build some kind of foundation and then build up to the truth, where one of us is right and the other is wrong, or at the very least where we both reform our views and come to a better conclusion. But a game of sophistry doesn't strike me as being too interesting, unless you're Socrates. But even then, sometimes you shouldn't even stand that unless someone's willing to admit that this is a good starting place. I think common sense. Everyone likes to say that we need to develop this strong Cartesian starting point, and that's where you start off with. But I really disagree with that. In my mind, you have a proper place to start. You have your common sense. Can that be wrong? Sure. But everybody starts off with common sense. It's only when you have overwhelming evidence to the contrary that you might want to start again. not just when you not just when you can't get first principles correctly. I think that's where people screw up. I think that they buy into this Cartesian game, but unlike Descartes, they don't believe it goes anywhere, and then they just dust their hands off and say, "Okay, it's good to start off here." No,
Well, it's like the trolley problem. It's meant to like hand wave. Oh, we don't know anything. Oh, there's no such thing as morality. Oh, there's no such thing as reality. So we're gonna do what we want and everything. I personally believe that language is a social construct that has no meaning to it. So you know how it is. It's just like all ridiculous.
I mean, language itself is actually not a social construct, because it doesn't start off with society from on high giving you something. Rather, language exists because it is something which proceeds from the intellect. The human mind abstracts things from the world around it. So, for example, I have this water bottle right here. It's usually my go-to example. Now, I might just look at it for the very first time, come up with a word for it, but I only come up with a word for it because my intellect takes what's in front of me, abstracts it, and then with my will, I verbalize a way to communicate that with someone else. It might start off, with maybe basic grunts and stuff, but eventually you develop rules and grammar and syntax. But ultimately, it's a way to communicate what's already found within your intellect. And that's actually why we should always emphasize man as a social, rational animal. I think when you start getting to the idea of mankind as an abstraction, as a social construct as well, we kind of buy into this bullet where everything that comes from man is also a social construct. No, we understand what we are, and that's because God has given us an intellect to abstract the true things of the world and communicate it with you. Does that require like a special solid definition that applies in all times and places? No. The intellect gives you a rough idea, but it's through study and knowledge where you refine it and it becomes a lot more precise. We all know what water is. We didn't need the chemical definition of H2O to know that our ancestors, when they referenced water, they referenced a liquid that was clear in nature and all this other stuff. It's only when it gets more refined that it gets more specific and it gets more accurate. So that's what the purpose of language is. It's to communicate what is known in our intellect and what we have abstracted about the world around us.
And sorry for anyone that was watching, I was joking about the language thing because it's self-defeating. But sorry, continue with the moralizing.
Oh, no worries. Actually, and that's what I want to bring in this discussion, metaphysics, because it's often this forgotten science where we really need to turn to in order to start from morality. Usually with morality, we usually start with our intuitions, and while that can be good because they tell us about moral truths, really they need to be based on, if we're going to develop a science of it, they need to be developed around a good metaphysical understanding of what man is and what man's proper relationship to God is as well, because that's where we actually start deriving moral Catholic truth. That's the natural law. Understanding what man is by nature and understanding his ends, his telos, and finding out a proper way which man can fulfill it as a rational social animal, and also one who has certain relationships to God himself. And God provides revelation as a way of supplementing our knowledge and improving it, because we're also human beings who are caught in sin. So sometimes we need to be refined. But if you start off with common sense, it's going to tell you not everything about moral truths. Some things have to be discovered, but it's going to tell you that the opposite way of starting off with morality doesn't real isn't going to get you anywhere. It's a terrible way to start off.
I don't know. I don't have much more to say because I agree with you. I mean, I suppose with moral realism established, what next? What's the next thing down the line?
So next we have to develop what not just the fact that morality exists, but its nature. What is it by nature? So, moral truths, what do they pertain to? So, usually we'd start off with a man, because we start off with anthropology. What is man by nature? And man is a social, rational animal. And the good of mankind can be deduced by properly understanding ourselves, and as well as our source in God. So usually we start off with something fairly remedial, like divine command theory. And divine command theory is right. We ought to obey God's divine commands. It shouldn't probably be the place where we start off grounding morality. Rather, morality is grounded in human nature, both as it exists in the world and as it pre-exists eternally in the mind of God. So I kind of go well, I do agree with Scotus's starting off point in terms of epistemology. I think Thomas is more or less right. We start off with understanding human nature. Man is a social, rational animal. That's the essence of man. And in terms of how that doesn't contradict God being the source and grounding of morality, all goodness proceeds eternally in God himself. And what starts off with God obviously is going to return to God. So we start off with that. And because we understand man is God's creation and that man's perfection is in God, and then we understand that man's ultimate supernatural end is in God himself, and that that is what morality has to lead us to. It has to lead us to God, and that's why we have revelation. The idea that God reveals himself in a certain way where we could properly worship him and forge a proper relationship with him. And this is what is called the ceremonial law. What is God's way of perfectly wanting worship and receiving worship? And that is given first in the Old Testament and then in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, the ceremonial law was done through the temple. God would want blood offerings, goats, sheep, doves, all that. They'd be sacrificed to the temple, and this would be a way of God withholding his punishment from sins which are personal, as opposed to original sin. You could not get rid of original sin in the Old Covenant, but God can withhold punishment for sins which one commits. And that's also true of circumcision. Circumcision was the baptism of the Old Testament. If your child was not circumcised on the 8th day, then that child would have been considered a part of the Gentiles, not in the tribe, and they would not have been freed from the punishments which were visited upon man when he fell through Adam. So in the Old Testament, you were part of the covenant through circumcision, and sacrifices worked as a way of God withholding punishment for your sins. In the New Testament, not only are your punishments withheld when you are baptized, but they are ultimately in you changed. You are a new creature through baptism. God has given you a new heart. You are regenerate, and you are given the 3 virtues of faith, hope, and charity. And you are really changed. It's not God withholding something. It is God giving you righteousness. And that righteousness is first given to Christ. It exists in him properly, but by participating in the new covenant, that righteousness also becomes ours in a secondary way. And because we participate in God's righteousness, we ourselves are told to be clean. God has given us a new heart, and we remain in the covenant. And as we remain in the covenant, we also have our own sacrificial system too. Christ died once for us all on the cross, but we still commit venial sins, and those warrant some kind of punishment. So how is it that we get rid of those? We could get rid of them through confession, sure. That's how we also get rid of mortal sins, the ones we do commit and have knowledge of. But venial sins are forgiven, even when we might not realize it, through the sacrifice of the Mass. And that's done every week on Sunday. And when you participate in that, God redeems you of your sins as well through communion. So that is the ceremonial law. It's in the New Testament. It's done when Christ is offered himself up once on the cross, and then we do that every Sunday in memory of him. It's part of the same sacrifice because the victim is the same, Jesus Christ. The priest is the same, Jesus Christ, but in persona Christi, in the person of the priest. And so those are the same. And lastly, the immolation is also the same too, because in the cross, Christ was immolated when blood was separated from his body. Hence the double consecration. Christ is consecrated once in body and twice in blood. So that's the immolation that goes on, a real change in the victim. But that's the same one that happens at Calvary. So they are one in sharing the same attributes, but they have a new mode, a new way of manifesting themselves in the sacrifice of the Mass in an unbloody manner. So that's how the ceremonial law continues. And this is how we properly worship God through revelation. This is the moral law. This is the ceremonial law. The moral law is what we can understand by nature, just by pure reason alone. And this is done through properly understanding man and what his moral obligations are as a social, rational animal to himself and to others.
Okay. Not really sure what to say to that. And 21 just fell out of here. I'm not sure why.
So just if you want a succinct summary of all that, moral law is the ceremonial law. If you want to follow that and follow God and follow divine revelation, which we are all obliged to do, follow Scripture, follow tradition, follow the Church. That is how we get to our supernatural end. When it comes to the moral law, what we know by pure reason, that's done by understanding what you are as a human being, understanding what your social obligations to other people are in the realm of society and even in your own personal life, and understanding what makes us flourish. Understanding those things helps us to understand what's called the moral law, what we are obliged to do anywhere and everywhere. There's a reason why in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, we are commanded not to kill one another. We don't need revelation to know that. That's just known by the moral law, but it continues on for that reason. So if we want to follow the moral law, we have to understand where we are as individuals and our social ends. So do you want to begin there by discussing how we come to understand what our social ends are to one another?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, sure.
Oh, okay. So society first. So our social ends, as well as society, starts off with the family. Vatican II, I'll reference that because why not, calls the family the domestic church. And in the same way that proper spiritual development starts off by a rightly ordered family, so too does social development start there. So people think that the idea of the family is a social construct, but in truth, society is a family construct. It starts off with men who take wives, because women would be pregnant and they would be vulnerable. The men in the society would be defenders. They would protect the woman, protect the general society. They would make sure that they were taken care of, got the food, and women worked more or less as in a nurturing capacity. Now, while people can bring up, oh, what about this society where they didn't exactly fit that image? Oh, okay. What about that society? Sometimes the circumstances might differ, but that's how pretty much it all started off. And no one can really look at a woman in such a vulnerable state of pregnancy as needing anything other than someone to protect them. This is one of the issues with having a huge servile state. It's something that takes over the man's role, and the state becomes the protector of the woman. But in truth, men should be protectors. Men are the head of the hierarchy. Women are there to nurture children, to support, work as helpers, and both those roles are very good. In fact, there's something that God wants for both people, and in light of that, we become a lot better. as a group and as a stable organization. So it starts off there. And then in terms of understanding our ends, it goes to the greater society. What do we owe one another? Where do our ends lie? So if the family is a microcosm of the greater society, then society itself should be hierarchical. And there should be lesser control as the top goes on. So everybody in that hierarchy respects one another's authority, and to make sure authority isn't breached. So this is where morality starts off again. It's understanding that society is ordered for the sake of taking care of one another and making sure that we each fulfill our roles, first in the family, then to one another. What do we owe our community? And that would go to being involved with one another, providing social support, having similarities in terms of worship. And it's then when we realize what are some moral problems that lead to social instability. Well, we really need to look no further than not killing one another, not raping one another. Those seem to have a lot of bad social ramifications. We also have issues like lust, which also cause tremendous amounts of problems that have to be properly balanced and also suppressed. You also have to push for virtues like fortitude, knowing exactly what to do at the right time, and you have to push for virtues that basically make sure that society remains stable. Consequentialism is right insofar as it says that we have to make sure everyone flourishes in their proper end. It's only wrong when it states that there is nothing we can't violate in order to get that end. There are obviously moral rules which are absolute in all contexts. So, for example, not skinning babies alive would be an obvious one, but something a little more obvious is causing an abortion. That's always wrong in every circumstance, and even if it was to bring about some greater good of flourishing, you couldn't do that. Even supernatural laws are much more forceful in this. I don't care how many unborn children it saves, and goodness knows I want to stop abortion. I would never desecrate a consecrated host, even if I was guaranteed that would be an outcome. Consequentialism fails because it thinks that there are no moral absolutes that can get in the way of society flourishing. And that tends to be the problem with consequentialism, and why that's not something we as Catholics really can buy into.
One sort of question from the atheist perspective or whatever, from the incorrect perspective I have then isn't this all just like a naturalistic fallacy, like appealing to like nature, appealing to families, all this stuff, like just because this is what we see generally, why does that mean there should be any moral weight behind any of this?
Right. So one issue with the moral fallacy is that it conflates. Please explain your unjustified not skinning babies alive stance. Well, I can't, so I guess. All right. But seriously, the issue with the naturalistic fallacy is that it conflates nature as an end with nature as something which mankind leaves untouched. So, for example, bears are natural because they occur in nature. Mankind isn't responsible for the creation of bears. Yet being mauled by a bear is natural because bear maulings are also part of the natural order too. Now, they're not good, obviously, but that's not what I mean when I say we need to look to our nature. We need to look to our nature as an end rather than thinking of it as a starting place. So, just to use an example, my end as a human being is in the family because that's my fun. Because I start off first coming from a family, and I flourish through that institution. So my end needs to be in that institution as well. That is where flourishing starts, and that's also when flourishing continues, and and ends too. So I am disposed to having a family. I am not disposed to having a bear mauling. A bear mauling, while it's also found in nature, I wasn't caused by a bear mauling. A bear mauling had nothing to do with my flourishing. It has nothing to do with human lives at all. And that's not the same thing. The same comes with eating, I don't know, with eating rocks. Rocks are also natural, and we also don't eat them. But there is a distinction to be had between something which mankind leaves untouched and gets from nature, and what is objectively true of what helps mankind flourish through nature. So that would be the main distinction I'd want to touch on.
Okay, so I mean, I get that there's a distinction between the radical left-wing definition of nature, that like what things are if they're untouched, and that's what left-wingers like to pretend we mean, either because they're stupid or they're lying, usually both. But even that, if we ignore the sort of way they try and redefine this, and we just look at what we actually mean when we say nature, and when we're talking about morality or theology or anything, whether it's about family or sexuality or anything, like why should there be any implications from any of this? Why should we care, like if it's like the supposed nature of humanity to have families or to have children, or if it's the nature of the sexual organs to produce children rather than just be used for fun? Like why should we care? Like what does it matter?
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter about whether you care about it or not. It's just the truth. I mean, I could not really care one way or another about a lot of truths, but they still remain truthful, and it still remains the fact that we ought to do it.
But, like, why should we ought to do it? That's the question.
I see. So, good question. So we begin by understanding that mankind has a final cause, a telos, and those final causes are as much true as anything else. So if somebody was to say something along the lines of, why ought triangles have three sides? Well, that's just the nature of a triangle. That's just what they are. Why ought mankind flourish in a family? Well, that's what mankind is by nature. He's just something which flourishes in a family. It's something which is observable. It's another example. Why ought my brain care about truth rather than falsehood? Well, that's what the reason is. It's disposed. It has its proper end in thinking about truth. Every norm is rooted in those particular ends. If somebody was to say, I don't really care what's true or false, I really just care about what helps me personally, and I'll believe anything. Well, I mean, good. I mean, fine, but that's not what your intellect is there to do. You are a dishonest person. You're not somebody who cares about reason. You're just somebody who uses it as an instrument. Really, reason exists for the purpose of finding truth. That's its end. And if somebody denies that the intellect has its proper end in finding truth, then that is something that they're either going to say they come to by a justified reason, so they're presuming those are the proper ends of their faculties, or they're making a guess, they're hypothesizing, in which case I'm not in the mood for speculation.
Oh, it's almost like sin is actually about when you're deciding not to be, and it's not just like a word for when you do bad stuff. It's like there's something metaphysical. It's like actually legit there. But I just wanted to also say that, with this discussion of, well, we're meant to pursue truth and everything, I just want to say, on the very progressive side, there is actually a good reasoning to be a postmodernist, to be an anti-realist, and it's that, what is truth other than something that you have to subject yourself to? Well, that's slavery. That's fascism, and I will not subjugate myself to this hierarchy of whatever you determine as truth. So there is this kind of natural thing that if you're going against everything reactionary, of course you would want to rebel against reality itself also. And so this is what they genuinely do, and that's why literally with progressives, it's literally not about truth. It's about their own desires that come from wherever, ex nihilo. I guess they assume that comes ex nihilo or wherever, but I just wanted to put that in there. Yeah,
I mean, there's definitely something to that. I don't know who said it, but there was an atheist who said something along the lines of, in order for good people to, there are always going to be good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things, but for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. No, every person has a system of morality, and sometimes that system gets it wrong, and what people mistake for their obligations, they mistake for evil. And that's not relegated to Christians or Jews or any religious person. That's relegated to anyone who has moral ends. And that's why it's actually very important that you get your system of morality right, because you might be someone who really genuinely wants to do something good, but is mistaken in picking the wrong system of ethics, in which case that leads to tremendously bad consequences. Now, I don't know what those... Now, there are a lot of things progressives think is charitable, nice, and tolerant, but in truth, it's I would say is objectively evil. I'm not going to mention that because I don't want to demonetize this channel, but I will say that it is very important just for that, and I'm sure the audience has no problem thinking of things that are evil that progressives are doing, which they believe is good.
Yeah, there's several things to say about them. But I think the atheist comment is funny, but it's like someone that literally doesn't even believe in a normative good or evil, probably because they don't believe in God. They're telling you about, oh, well, they're going to make religious people do bad things. It's like, it's also disingenuous. But just wanted to give a few observations on exactly what the progressives are like with this stuff. And, the frame is that they're tolerant and that they're, genteel, open-minded. They're here to reduce harm and contribute to the flourishing of humans, right? Secular humanism, right? Well, and I just want to credit someone I was working with in Anon was setting up these notes, so it's not just myself, and they, have some experience with people in those circles that I don't have. So I just wanted to credit that. So there's this actual, of course, it's not about truth. It's not about the actual argument like that atheist was with. We gotta understand how progressives operate, how they actually feel. And, when you're young, you're idealistic. Hey, I want to actually help people. I want to change the world, climate change, blah, blah, blah. But eventually they get, they mature and they start to realize that things aren't going to work out and they're not going to get what they want. And there's this weird impulse because, progressivism is about rebelling against nature. It's about rebelling against reality itself. So they have this unnatural impulse where they enjoy the feeling and aesthetic of emptiness, of being unfulfilled, of hunger as opposed to the actual sustenance, of ignoring their empathy and conscience. They actually enjoy that odd feeling in a way. And it's quite strange, but it starts to make sense when you see how they behave in online and how they behave in reality and whatever. So, and we see this it's not just, the blue-haired check mark on Twitter or whatever. We see this on the macro scale. And, we all know since the French Revolution, since the Protestant Revolution, it's been an eternal revolution that keeps progressing, the progress of history. And each time they achieve political and social victories, they're never satiated, right? They're never satisfied, and they have to keep going. They just keep burning along. That's because they actually enjoy the lack of satiation. That's what they're there for. And some of them actually know that winning these social victories, whether it's transgenderism or same-sex, whatever, it actually makes them feel worse, but they're attracted to that. So it's just this completely uncanny, unusual thing that is contrary to human nature, but this is what it kind of is. Progressivism is inhuman.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there, and this is where I'll come back to humanism as also a misnomer. What is humanism other than looking for the flourishing of humankind? But if you think humanity is a social construct, or what man is something we define for ourselves, then you're not really interested in humanism. You're just interested in your idealized version of what humanity is, and you're projecting it. Really, true humanism is found within understanding God as the source of humanity and the end of our flourishing. A true Christianity is a true humanism because it's something that takes humanity as objectively grounded in God and from all eternity, and knowing that he is our proper end.
Christians are the real humanists.
I mean, it is true. Humanism started off as a Christian movement in the Catholic Church. It spun off, unfortunately, into Protestantism because they took, so that's what happened to some of the worst aspects. Erasmus was someone who was just terrible for that. But if you look at other humanists, someone like Thomas More, and I believe you could categorize the original John Fisher, not me, but the OG, as being a humanist as well. Their focus was on the flourishing of mankind intellectually, going back to the sources, understanding the original languages of the scriptures. And some of that was there in the medieval scholastic era, but they really did want to turn back. And suffice to say, there were some good nuggets of wisdom in there. Thomas More is perhaps the best figure of the humanist movement, and the man was eventually canonized a saint. Protestants are the real consequentialists. Nice.
I suppose to like sort of back up a bit. Speaking of consequentialism, like what is like what's incorrect about consequentialism? Like what makes it factually incorrect?
Well, a few things. One, it is right about trying to see. Well, it is right that consequentially speaking, we are supposed to maximize the good. It doesn't mean that there can be no impediments to that, which are absolute in and of themselves. So, for example, if you were a consequentialist, even a Christian one, let's say you try to say you were a Catholic consequentialist, we know that couldn't be the case because not only does the magisterium directly condemn it, but we have moral laws that are absolute no matter what the consequences are. So if someone was to say you could stop abortion, but you just have to desecrate the Eucharist, no, I'm not going to do that. That is a moral absolute, and no matter what good can come out of it, you are not supposed to do it. So Catholicism is right in condemning consequentialism as violating that rule. There are things which you cannot violate, even if a good should come out of it. St. Paul says in Scripture, shall we continue on to sin that more grace should abound? No, obviously not. Although, even if it could be shown that more grace was to abound by sinning, Paul would probably be against it. Not probably, he would be against it. So that's where consequentialism first makes this mistake. And there's actually a very interesting thought experiment that a university professor had the class do. He asked us all right, let's say that there was a lottery. And in this lottery, everyone's name is put in there. Nobody is going to be left out, no matter how great your status is or how little your status is. You could be chosen at random when enough people need organs, and you can be killed. And your organs will be harvested. Now, here's the thing and it would only be in very rare cases. Like if you knew for a matter of fact you could save 5 people or so. What reason would we have to be against that? Like from a consequential perspective. And you can only really give the most stupid defenses of what worse consequences could arise. Like, this would make everyone paranoid. No, people have been shown to live under bad circumstances and then move on with their lives. And people sometimes might get used to it. Maybe it just ends up being normalized. Who knows? Are people going to not do it and not participate? Is there going to be a riot? No, people are pretty much lemmings. A lot of them will just follow along with it, even if there are people who disagree with it. And I'm pretty sure no one would have any issue in finding real world examples of this. It is just so counterintuitive, though. It just strikes against common sense so much that you don't really care too much for it. So this would be one example of where consequentialism fails. Not only that, but consequentialism is just terrible because you could not live your life as a consequentialist. If that was the case, then look at somebody like Peter Singer, and I know people don't generally like him, but and for good reason. This is a guy who actually tries to live. This is actually a guy who says that consequentialism comes with a big price tag, because a lot of your income is disposable, and it would objectively make a lot more people happy if you gave up a lot of it and donated it to other people around the world. I think he has a paper called "Giving Until It Hurts," something along those lines, and it is pretty much unlivable. Not only that, but without proper moral distinctions like material and formal cooperation with evil. So, for example, there's a difference between me enslaving children and me patroning a store where they'll use that money to do so. I'm not directly doing it, but I do know my money is going to go to that. But sometimes it's just but it's such a social necessity that I have to live with it. Someone like a consequentialist could not make that, and they would. If you really want to maximize happiness, then you would probably try to do your best to not even purchase or frequent. You'd have to go around making sure that your food, your resources were as ethically sourced as possible. And it's not really something I think people could honestly live with themselves if they were to try to do it. And funny enough, it would probably just undermine us living socially, because it would mean that a lot of the immediate stuff that we could buy and afford, because we're willing to put up with a bit of evil, materially speaking, can't really be done because that would be off limits. So consequentialism is much harder than people give it credit for. The so-called it makes sense to me consequentialists who just want their own happiness, they're not really consistent. And if they were consistent, then there would be cases that just seem morally counterintuitive that I don't think people want to buy into. I don't think that people would be willing to make the trade-off. I don't really think people would be willing to make the trade-off where they would be okay with being randomly chosen by lottery to give up some of their organs if it would save 5 people. So yeah, it's not a good system for these reasons. And Septus actually makes a great point. Consequences can't be known, so you can't know if your actions are moral. So that is the case, although a consequentialist might say you're not really responsible for things that are out of your control, like your ignorance. But yeah, it does seem like finding a moral calculus is so, it just strikes me as being so ingrained in minutia. Like, you have to be so anal about where exactly the math goes in order to get the good. But really, morality should be something the everyday man can practice in their life. Just by knowing a few heuristics and practicing a few virtues, they can learn to perfect. So I think something along the lines of virtue theory or even a deontology is much better just for those two things alone.
Well, what about this comment from Lambuda? Does he not prove that Jesus Christ was a consequentialist?
Oh, no, actually. In fact, if you read the Talmud, and I know I'm probably going to get a lot of crap for that, but if you read the Talmud, there's actually a bit of debate about that issue. The purpose of the law is keep the law so you shall live. If you are keeping the Sabbath, knowing that somebody is dying, or that their life will not be saved, then you're kind of defeating the whole purpose of the law. So even the law is built for a particular end, and even if you look at canon law exists for the salvation of souls. The law given to us by God exists for a particular end, and if you are interpreting it in a way which subverts that end, then you're ipso facto doing it wrong.
Okay. And I guess we got one super chat, so we'll deal with that now. Give me more money, guys. It's required, mandatory. Zirich, I don't know, something. A dude with some sort of name says Zachariah. Oh, Zachariah, that's it. I'm really stupid. Wow. Whoa. Zachariah, what do you guys think of O'Sullivan's first law, aka Cthulhu always swims leftwards? I've never heard this attributed to O'Sullivan before. John O'Sullivan. I googled this quickly, but yes, all organizations that are not actually right wing over time become left wing. That's his law. This there's some other dude who like is attributed for a very similar quote. But yes, I know. I mean, this is a pretty standard sort of idea in our circles, I suppose. The sort of natural leftward drift of most organizations. I suppose one area where we've seen this very clearly recently is in corporations, where for a long time this was always like a left-wing meme, but for a long time there's a general popular belief that corporations were right-wing, and this has just simply never been true. This has never really been true. But this was something that was promoted a lot, this was an idea that was promoted a lot by the left, that corporations are generally right wing, and now it's really to a point where no one except like the most insane communist can actually seriously believe this. That corporations are right wing. If by right wing you mean they like to make money, yes, that's true. But that's a very question begging definition of.
Well, I mean, they could always change it to. I mean, you could always change it to portraying everyone as being right wing. I mean, now you could be right. You could be transsexual. You could be transgendered, and you could be right wing. You could be gay and right wing, and socially speaking, accepting of it. But as long as you are taking money from the working class, who apparently the left stands up for, because they see eye to eye on everything, you are ipso facto right wing. I don't really have too much to comment on it, but it feels true. And I'd also say that even places that start off as proclaiming themselves to be right-wing even skew leftward too. I mean, the American conservative is probably the best example of that.
Yeah, it requires a very strong it requires a very strong constitution. I don't mean it like the written sense, but like the organization must be very strong in its right-wingedness to not just be totally subverted. And I got another super chat from Lambuda. Thank you for doing most of the legwork towards Charlemagne's latest video. Yeah, I mean, you're welcome, guys. I know I did a lot of work there. It's really on me. I don't like too much praise or anything like that. I do like a lot of money, but like one thank you, maybe two, that's good enough. I don't need much more than that. But it's an inside joke for guys that don't get. Go check out Charlemagne's latest video. It's very good. But yes. So I don't know. That's the super chats.
Could I touch on one more thing? And it also touches on one of the questions or statements that Lambda made in the comments. He says, "I basically agree that we should default to acting deontologically, although in simple cases, I think consequentialism is natural." So yeah, assessing the consequences of your actions is something which is good. But something that has to be noted is the action itself cannot be there are actions that are purely evil in and of themselves, and no matter what the consequences are, they're still evil. And there are particularly difficult moral cases that Lambda is right about. So for example, I know, Settler, you hate this, but it's actually a good one. The trolley problem, and please don't groan here. The trolley problem is actually started off as a way of giving example to Thomas Aquinas's doctrine of double effect. So in the first...
I don't really remember ever mentioning the trolley problem, so I don't know why you think I hated it.
I thought you did.
No, I don't remember ever mentioning that
never mind.
One of my live streams.
Oh, okay. So the trolley problem was basically a way of giving an example to Thomas Aquinas's doctrine of double effect. In the first trolley problem, you could pull a switch and it would shift from 5 people dying to 1 person dying. And that seems to me like something we'd all be morally okay with. But it's a little different in the second trolley problem, where you'd have to push someone directly into the train, someone who's really fat, and stop them from hitting 5 other people. And what's the difference between the two circumstances that kind of tingle our moral senses? Well, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, in the first trolley problem, Applied Virtue hates it. In the first trolley problem, you are pulling a lever. That is the cause, and the effect is saving. The first effect is saving 5 people. The second effect is letting somebody die as a result of saving 5 people. And the reason why it is letting somebody die is because both of those things, saving and letting somebody die, are effects of the cause being the pulling of the lever. So pulling a lever is morally neutral, and you are allowed to, your cause can be justified if it is done for a good effect and you materially allow for the evil effect to take place. But in the second example, the reason why you can't push the fat man is because pushing the fat man is the cause of the train derailing and killing him, whereas saving those 5 people is the effect to that. So in that case, the cause is not morally neutral, but morally evil. So that's why you're not allowed to do it. And the same can be said about allowing for civilian casualties in war. When you are targeting, let's say you're targeting a military base, you're targeting people who are out to kill your country or stand to pose a threat to your country. So that's more or less a form of self-defense. Now, if you know that there might be civilians on that base, yes, you're not formally targeting them. They just happen to be there. However, this would never be allowed. This is why atomic bombings cannot be said to be justified in war settings. In fact, Vatican II, Gaudium Spence actually condemns atomic bombings, and for good reason. Even prior to Vatican II, I believe both Pope Pius XII and John the 23rd condemned it. But the reason why is because destroying whole cities is just targeting civilians. That is evil. And and sometimes even moral Catholic philosophers try to get around it, like, oh, well, everyone there was a potential draftee to the Japanese military, so they were all really moral military targets. No, no one would have known whether or not that was the case. And it can't just be defended on the consequentialist line of reasoning, well, the invasion would have been worse. Okay, it might have been, but you can't do evil, so evil doesn't arise from a greater evil doesn't arise. That's just not allowed. So that would be kind of the doctrine of double effect, and that's how we would measure 2 very problematic outcomes. We would delineate between the evil being an effect of the cause, which is morally neutral, that we materially allow for the benefit of doing the good, as opposed to causing an evil to bring about a good.
Okay, and on the topic of consequentialism and Jesus earlier, Lambuda also said this, and I don't know if you want to respond to it.
Is consequentialism useful when laws conflict? So something that has to be emphasized is there can never be 2 absolutely good, there can never be moral obligations that contradict one another. So if 2 things seem contradictory, then there has to be a way of resolving the 2 things, because God would not legislate absolute laws we are bound to follow, which are impossible. God does not command impossibilities. There are ways of rectifying two tense situations, like saving 5 people and letting 1 person die. We have an answer for that. But we can never use consequentialism when the laws, but we are never in a position where the laws are going to truly conflict with one another.
Wow, we've got a libertarian that's a consequentialist. We've got Vaush, the communist, that's a consequentialist. We've got Protestants that are consequential. It's almost like everyone's consequentialists here, except me, of course. And it's just a matter of them determining by their own fiat which consequence they want.
Well, the consequence I want is getting more super chats from Lambuda.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But speaking of super chats, 21 also gave a blank super chat.
It wasn't meant to be blank. It wasn't meant to be blank.
Yeah, he did first $3. Thanks, 21, and he did this follow-up comment. My comment is, you're a pleb, but you're my pleb, my almsgiving. Thank you very much, 21. But yes, yeah. So I don't know where does that leave us?
I was still interested in the consequentialist line. I agree with Geocon. I also hate the trolley problem because they usually use it as a a catch-22 in order to justify consequentialism. Like literally the introductory lecture at Harvard in terms of ethics was them dragging this out. They drag it out everywhere, and it's used to funnel that. But beside that, oh, sorry, did you want to say something, John?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, which is weird because in nature, it's really supposed to highlight deontology. It's actually supposed to defend the theory of double effect, which St. Thomas Aquinas uses in the Summa. So really, it's more along the lines of, if you properly understand it, it's more of a defense. And the answer is there is a difference between doing something which is morally neutral to bring about a good effect and tolerating an evil effect, as opposed to causing an evil effect to bring about a good effect. Causing something which is evil to bring about a good effect.
Right, exactly. And but Lambuda did imply something interesting here, where we have our deontology, we have our belief systems, we have our frameworks, but generally in the moment, like if it was a panic situation, we do kind of revert to this kind of consequentialist. Or if we're just doing the equivalent of paper napkin math in terms of morality, we usually default to this kind of consequentialism. And that's pointing out something important here, in that there is an intuitive, almost instinctive sense to consequentialism, as it's usually expressed, especially by the left. And of course, basically it isn't morality, it's just your own fiat. And what it's doing there by doing this weird intuitive instinctiveness, it's actually returning us to an earlier state. I was talking to Reactionary Rat about this, but basically progressives, he makes this point a lot, progressives are basically returning us to like the animal state, the state of nature animal, literally, where it's just going off of instinct. There isn't really any objective meaning or any rules or anything. It's just how you feel in the moment, right? And it's just quite interesting because, of course, the frame is that they're literally the Brahmins, right? They're the highest and most sophisticated classes and professors and artists in the world and everything. But I think Judith Butler or someone else was saying it, where they were literally talking about how their ideology comes down to instinct, and it isn't actually about any of these higher ideals that they prevaricate about all the time. You're muted.
Someone in the chat seems to disagree with me. You're not letting one person die. You are directly causing his death because he would have lived if you didn't pull the lever. This is not the Catholic position. Well, so a few things here. I think Ingram is mistaking counterfactual for causality. So just to give one example, say I threw a rock at a window, and because somebody else wanted to beat me to that, he threw a brick, and it went faster than my rock and broke the window. Well, it's true that me throwing the rock, if I didn't throw the rock, then the window wouldn't have broken, but my rock throwing did cause the window to break in any direct way. In the same way, it's true that that person would not have died if I did not pull the lever, but I was not the one who put him in the track. I was not the one who created that dilemma. Somebody else did, and the only thing I did was mitigate a greater evil from occurring, 5 people dying. So that's just something I want to make a quick distinction on. And the doctrine of double effect is the Catholic position. If you want to research it, doctrine of double effect, Thomas Aquinas, feel free. But I don't think I'm really overstepping my bounds on this one.
So if that's the case, then why is it that abortion is not permitted even in cases of saving the life of the mother?
Oh, so because abortion is the direct killing of a child. In a case where a mother, and there's actually some situations where the child can be removed to save the life of the mother, and the child would die out of the uterus. But that would actually be covered under the doctrine of double effect, because in letting the child die outside, you are your intention isn't to kill the child. Your intention is to save the mother. Unfortunately, that is one of the effects of the situation, where in doing something good, saving the life of somebody as one effect of the removal, you end up letting somebody else die. So it would be sort of like, imagine if you were in a situation where you would have, let's say you're in a situation where somebody is, I don't know, infected, and you take them out of the house, and they end up dying in the cold. Unfortunately, you did it to save the life of everyone else in the house. Unfortunately, the effect is that they die. It's not a direct cause of you killing them. It's a cause of them being out of the home and susceptible to the elements. Now, if you just decided to take a knife and start stabbing them, and you yourself were the cause, then that would be an instance of you causing it because you're the agent behind it. Whereas if you wanted to, you would have been happy to have put them outside of the home, even if the weather was good, and they would have been okay. So that would be the difference. You have to look at it from the perspective of the agent doing the cause, being the causal role. Whereas in the trolley problem, the direct cause of as the agent, you are not directly causing any killing of somebody. You're not going up, stabbing, or hurting them. You are pulling the lever for the effect of saving 5 people, and you are letting one person die you would have otherwise been happy to have saved if it was in your power.
So, so aborting the baby that is threatening the life of the mother is like pushing the fat man off the cliff.
Yeah, if you were to directly kill the child, it would be the equivalent of pushing the fat man. Did somebody say who was defending cuties?
I think he's talking about Vaush, not us.
Oh, okay. I actually had a podcast where I was talking against cuties, so I was like, wait, did he see that? Did he misunderstand my position?
Yeah, I also want to say it wasn't just Vaush. It was NPR and NBC and mainstream journalists and these supposed, movie reviewers, Red Tomatoes people, literally infesting our wherever. So just,
Yeah, I mean that whole situation was especially blackpilling because it's at first it seemed like perhaps it would be the one case where like left and right could agree on something, and nope. It was not.
And Ingram is right. The Catholic Church did denounce the bombings, and I agree. Those bombings would need to be denounced. They were directly targeting civilians, and that is never permissible. You cannot, if you can, you are not supposed to target civilians. You are only supposed to target military personnel in war because they're the ones involved that you are defending your country from. The citizens do not have that sort of role. And in any case, when it comes to that, you are directly killing somebody. It's not just like in a case of bombing a military place where civilians just happen to be. You are targeting the military personnel, but if an effect is they die too, then yes, that's bad. But unfortunately, you could not help it. They were around the target. And that would be a side effect that you are not doing yourself. You are just targeting people for the sake of your own defense, and these are people directly involved with attacking your country. So that is, so that's the distinction. You have to make a distinction between the cause and the effects that result of the cause. It's okay to defend your country. It's okay to target military personnel who are attacking the country, and that is what you're doing. If one of the effects of that cause is a civilian dying, well, sad, you are not targeting that civilian. You are targeting the military. When you target a city, you are targeting civilians, so no consequences in light of that could justify it. That's the main difference between the two.
Okay, and a couple more super chats. One from Lambuda. Thank you very much. And I do always win. He said you win, Settler, for anyone not watching. And another one from Chris W for $20. No message, but thank you very much for the donation.
just wanted to dwell on the hot topic issues of you were talking about the Syria bombing, right?
No, I was talking about the atomic bombing.
Oh, the atomic bombing. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I didn't see the comment said Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm dumb, but so back on the cuties thing, the reason why it black pills, as Seller said, it black pills because we assumed that they actually believed this thing. They were more moderate than they actually are, and then we actually realized that they're much more radical. And the implication of this is really important. Okay, so we've got, they're all consequentialists, right? They're progressives, they're consequentialists. So of course, if they're trying to support the progress of history, sometimes exposing yourself and your radicalism and your evil is not very effective in helping push the cause and make it more popular. So of course, an optics game of lying about and hiding yourself for years and years is something that the consequentialists would want to do. And some of the supporters themselves are actually in on this too, this optics game, of course. Thinking back, an example of this is Obama in his 2008 election, where he said that he was against same-sex marriage, even though some of his supporters understood that it was not that. Another example of this optics game.
Of course, Hillary Clinton famously said that you need to have both a private and public position.
What bigots?
I think she said that at a Goldman Sachs speech or something crazy. Another example of the optics game is that, I was watching in commemoration of Rush Limbaugh, I was watching a 60 Minutes interview of him in 1991. And of course, it was basically just a hit piece. The 60 Minutes people are actually quite left-wing. And in 1991, they were talking about him in an unfavorable fashion, lambasting feminists, calling them feminazis, and attacking militant gays. So the media, the supposedly objective class, were talking about this stuff in 1991, and they probably still held the belief behind closed doors before that. And then what? The population comes to this position in 2010. We have to understand that these people playing this optics game, they are in fact much more radical than they even show now. Even with the craziness that they do now, progressives will play the optics game and hide what their actual positions are. And if you could imagine where we'll be in 20 years, we'll just assume that the progressives running the show are already there. Sorry, I'd have that little rant because it's just so ridiculous.
Well, I mean, think of it like this. It's not like they can go any further, he said hopingly. I have no room to hope.
And just to reiterate, the supporters are in on this stuff. They are in on the optics games. They are in on, treating your opponents basically as enemies that you want to crush. We like to think that the leaders like Vaush playing the terrible games with his opponents where he calls them evil and stuff and does these gotcha games, or, the leaders cracking down and locking down on people that go to church. We like to think, this is just the leaders. The supporters generally also understand, they're the enemy, the Schmittian friend-enemy distinction, and they want to crush them. So I just want to reiterate that they are in on the joke. They are in on the joke.
I just want to make a quick correction. The trolley problem was actually not done by Elizabeth Anscombe. I think it might have been done by Philippa Foot. Instead, I might have made that bit of a mistake. So don't read too much into that historically. I just wanted to use that as an example to highlight the issue. Just want to make that clarification.
But I guess something to say about like what you've said with abortion and these other things. And one of the examples you gave was like pushing someone out of a house and letting them die in the cold. Doesn't all these rules just cause unnecessary suffering? Because like with the person dying in the cold, wouldn't it be more humane to just kill them than let them like slowly freeze to death?
Yeah, but that would mean that Yeah, but unfortunately, that would mean you would be directly killing them, and it would, and while it would not be, how do I put? So one thing that we have to take in mind is that human dignity means that we are not allowed to um, violate that and take it away on our own accounts. Um, and it's not something which hurts the other person, but when we kill somebody, it is also a moral violation of our own person because it denigrates not just them, but it also denigrates us, since we are taking away since we are attacking not just the humanity in them, but in us as well. If you push somebody outside, while more suffering would occur, the consequence does not therefore outweigh the violation that you have. It does not outweigh the harm you would have done to yourself and the harm that would have been done by directly taking a life, because you are still under that rule, and that rule has a much heavier weight to it. Remember, that is not just another human being you're killing. It is, but it's also somebody made in the image of God. And it's not just a violation of that person by taking that life. It's also a violation of God himself. So attacking it would be contrary, whereas allowing somebody to die, while the consequences are worse because they are suffering in the cold, it at the very least means that you are not directly responsible. So you could at the very least still preserve that. And that's why it's very important that you don't just think of it in terms of a pain happiness scale, but rather in terms of just following the moral rules, absolutely and strictly, to respect the very basis of our humanity, the fact that we are built in the image of God.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree, of course. Just so we're clear, so there's no like misunderstanding. Like these are like I'm trying to represent the other side. I don't like believe any of these things I'm saying. I mean, I know
Devil's
you know this, but
advocate.
just in case any of the people in the audience aren't like are too. If anyone in the audience is too much of a moron not to realize that.
Yeah, they're devil's advocate, that's for sure.
But yeah. So what else? What else do we have to go over?
Another thing to keep in mind is that the answers to these questions are not definitive teachings. Even in that last example I gave of pushing somebody out of the house, the evils that would have resulted in having a person freeze to death, it might have been that amount of suffering might have been so bad you might consider that maybe the evils that come about it are still not outweighed from letting that person kill everyone else in the house with you from that disease. The consequences, like the pain, might even if you just want to measure it in terms of pain, it still would have been worse in light of that too. This is probably where deontology doesn't have as satisfactory an answer, because sometimes the consequences are really too much to deal with. But that's actually one of the benefits. You know that it's just not you finding an easy answer. You know it's about being willing to suffer for doing the good. And sometimes that is a requirement for us as Christians. You have to suffer sometimes if you want to obey God's law, even if it does mean you would benefit if you disobeyed.
If I didn't believe in God, why would I ever convince myself into accepting suffering instead of just avoiding pain and pursuing pleasure?
Good point.
There's some static on your end.
Reaction.
Yeah. But yes. So what else do we have to discuss, John?
You're muted.
Sorry. Well, I think I'm pretty good on my end. If anyone wants a good starting place for morality, like especially if you're interested in a more Thomistic perspective, read the Summa. He does divide the law into multiple categories, and you could actually start from there. Start off by reading the difference between the moral law, the civic law, and the ceremonial law, the civic law, and the moral law. as well as what the natural law is and the distinction between the new law of the new covenant and the old law. So that's a good place to start off with.
Yeah, there was some very interesting commentary in there about the marital debt. But I still wanted to just completely hammer on Vaush. And Seller, you highlighted a comment from someone saying Vaush is ruining a whole generation of Zoomers. And yeah, that's basically yeah, thank you. That's basically true. And we have to understand, I was talking to Reactionary Rat about this, we have to understand that, you know, the supporters, the people that are following these people, they are indeed in on the game. Like, some of them don't really get it at the high level, but in a sense they are in on the game, in that these Zoomers and these online people are in fact learning from him how to be this kind of, you know, anti-realist, you know, do whatever you feel instinctually kind of like evil. And that's going to have really, really bad effects. And, you know, it's not going to be reducible to their confusion or their misguidedness, because, you know, that kind of message is a dangerous drug, because it's there to satisfy them, and it helps corrupt people and actually make them malicious. So, you know, we have to really pray about these people. I mean, you know, and as that person that I was talking to, I'm not just like making this stuff up. They actually like show really bad things to each other behind doors, you know, on these digital spheres. And you know, I've been talking to people that were actually used to be progressive. They actually used to be like this, acting like themselves, fully believing and acting this way. And so, of course, they show, you know, they send content to each other like abuse core or pastel gore. Don't look that stuff up, but you get the point. They just show these ridiculous things to each other that are extremely profane. And like I said earlier about the hunger for the emptiness and the lack of being fulfilled, they do actually enjoy the idea of violating things, of breaking things down, of deconstructing things. Of course, from their perspective, all of this they perceive as being good, like pursuing pleasure, avoiding pain. That's what good and evil is. And they would, of course, view things that we would interpret as violating that thing as liberating it or introducing it to new experiences. So just don't forget that, of course, they think themselves that are good. It's just about, you know, what they think is good is evil, and what they think is evil is good. So it's like, it's just really dangerous.
Yeah. I guess one other question for John Fisher, something we were discussing before the show started, and that this was the morality of voting for the Democrats or other similar parties. You gave us a bit of an explanation before the show started how that works. What, like, is it possible to vote for a pro-choice party?
In very limiting circumstances, but just to give you an idea of how limiting they would be. So in order to be able to vote for someone who's pro-choice, there are two things you have to keep in mind. One, you cannot be voting for them because they are pro-choice. So that's not the reason why you're voting for them. That's something that you are tolerating in providing your vote. But it would be something you would tolerate to bring about to prevent an even greater evil from befalling. So, for example, let's say your choice was between two pro-choice politicians, but on top of being pro-choice, the other person is pro-euthanasia, whereas the person you're voting for is not. At that point, I'd say, yeah, and these are probably the only two guys who stand a chance of getting elected. I would say at that point, I'm definitely voting for my pro-choice candidate, not because I'm happy with their position, but because I know at the very least they're not promoting euthanasia on top of that. So that would be a very extreme example where voting for a pro-choice politician is okay. But if it's just like your standard Republican and your standard Democrat, and one is pro-life and the other is pro-choice, vote for the pro-life person. I don't really care about too much else. In terms of their economic policy, they're fairly similar. They're mostly pro-corporate. They are going to be pushing for. They're both going to be pushing for tax laws that are more or less beneficial for a certain economic bracket. In terms of other issues like immigration, like let's say you're the biggest open borders person ever. There's a difference between sending somebody who is violating the law back to their home country and letting an innocent person die. Like maybe they do have a right to be in the country, but that right doesn't seem to trump an innocent person's right to life to me.
I know what they would say. The Republicans have been elected many times since Roe v. Wade. They've even controlled all three branches, or they've controlled the House, the Senate, and the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and they have even at some times had a majority of the Supreme Court appointees, and they've failed to really get any very significant progress passed on banning abortion. So considering it seems like there's very little, if any, chance for Republicans ever having any serious restrictions on abortion, doesn't that mean that like the more pro-life thing to do is to vote for the Democrats so you can get like universal health care? And like, yes, I would vote for me, the hypothetical Catholic Democrat, would vote for the Republicans if I knew that would actually ban abortion. But since we know that's not going to happen, then Bernie Sanders is more pro-life.
Right. Well, first off, social programs are not going to guarantee less abortions. The abortion rates in Canada and in the United States are very similar, and yet we have far more social benefits to give around to people. We have universal health care. We also provide.
On that point, I'd like to point out that if you look at the U.S. state by state, the conservative states have significantly lower abortion rates than the liberal states.
Yeah. So. Just even from a factual basis, that's bunk. But let's look at it from a theoretical basis where that's all true. A few things have to be kept in mind. One, even if it was the case that an outright ban is not possible, at the very least, during Donald Trump's administration, and even George W. Bush did this, they actually made sure that there was no funding for abortion overseas, which is a good thing. Like, at least that's stopping abortion to a degree. That's funding stopping it. You know that when they start pushing universal health care, that means more of your tax dollars are going to go to a system that uses it for abortion. The reason why abortion rates are cheaper in Canada is because it's subsidized to a far higher degree. And that's also something to keep in mind as well. The healthcare that they want is one that intrudes on your liberty to not assist in killing innocent children. It doesn't help. So there's that to keep in mind as well. On top of that, even if it was established that both parties are pushing the same policy and that there's absolutely no change that's going to happen, the proper response is not to vote Democrat. It's to not vote at all. At the very least, by being apolitical, you're not contributing to a system that's offering you no options. There's a really good paper by Alistair McIntyre on this one where he says that if you are assisting in a system that's promoting evil on both sides, then it seems that you're just reinforcing a delusion. In which case, well, he doesn't say it like that, but that's how I would sum it up. In which case, why even bother being political? And not only that, you're much better off at the very least supporting a third party, at least giving people an option where to cast their vote. I'd still much rather push for a third party, even if it's so small and minuscule. At the very least, it's showing that I'm protesting the current system as is. The proper response is to protest the system then if there's no options being given to you, not in supporting the party that's pushing everyone down the slippery slope we're trying to warn against. So I don't understand that perspective. I'd much rather take a third party or not participate if it meant not supporting a system in its entirety.
I suppose on the not participation angle, one thing I've heard, I haven't really looked into this, but one thing I've heard some people say, and not from the left-wing side, from right-wing Catholics, is that St. John Paul II taught that we have a moral duty to politically participate. Is it like, I don't know, do you know much about that?
I do not know, but I do want to respond to somebody saying third-party votes in America are just throwing your vote away. A vote that's thrown away is better than a vote that more directly contributes to evil. I'm not aware of John Paul II's view on that matter, so I'm not going to comment there.
Okay.
Well, I, for one, bow down to our uniparty overlords.
But yeah, no, I mean, just on a practical level, I could not imagine ever voting for any of the mainstream parties in Canada again. I when I was younger, I used to vote for the Conservatives. And I know, I mean, there is a decent argument to be made for them, from a Catholic perspective. That is the one difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals and NDP in Canada is that the Conservatives, at least the Conservatives, are pretty good at supporting conscience protections, for like Catholic doctors and stuff like that, where the Liberals and the NDP will not support anything remotely like that. So I could see an argument for voting for them, on that basis alone. I mean, that's really the only basis I can see that the Conservatives would be better on. But I don't know, it's such that's just like such a niche issue, that I really just have lost all confidence in the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably an argument to be made that we could push. I have a friend who says that we should be voting for the Christian Heritage Party because they might push the conservative. If it grows big enough, then at the very least they might force the conservatives to push a little more to the right. And no, I do not believe both parties are equally evil, but I'm just saying hypothetically, if there was no objective difference between the two, then the response is to vote third party or not vote at all.
And for that same question too, I just want to help everyone out there. The whole trick is that there are not two major parties. It genuinely is a uniparty. It's just it's a kind of somewhat complex social mechanism that's meant to push together into a center-left consensus. That's the actual function of this thing, is to go forward, but not too quickly. And, so... what was it in the UK? There was like Michael Gove did lines of coke in college or something, and they found out in late 90s there was some scandal about some Tory MP had some serious sex scandal where they were doing really immoral shit. Sorry, but I'm sorry. Yeah, now I'm doing immoral stuff. But the point is that all of these people behind doors, they're usually not very virtuous people, let's say, and it is part of just basically the same consensus.
Yeah, I mean, on the I do, of course, understand, believe that there's not that voting for center right parties is not going to reverse progress anytime soon. But just on a practical level, it is still true that, as John Fisher said, when Trump and Bush were in office, there was a practical reduction in funding that was given for abortion, at least overseas. So, is the amount of influence we're able to have small? Yeah, but these are still moral considerations that need to be made, because there is still some influence that we can have through these things.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Whatever, and there's still a lot people can do at the local level. There are still pro-life groups you could be involved with. Even something along those lines is still a positive contribution. Your vote isn't the only thing you can do. I think that's probably a great myth of democracy. Some people might be susceptible to buying into that. If there's no party you can vote for, there's really no influence you could have.
Yeah. It I mean, this is one of the reasons that I'm black-pilled on politics or whatever. I guess one thing I've said a couple times is I'm post-black-pilled. And my sort of attitude on that is that we're just not getting anything done with politics. I'm not an oligarch, so there's nothing in the ruling class I can do about it, and I doubt I'm going to befriend any oligarchs anytime soon. So there's no changing going on there. So it's on the ground level stuff, I don't know, making people Catholic, or making them convincing someone to be pro-life, not for political reasons, just so that person won't have an abortion, or that person's or if that person's a man, then his girlfriend or wife or whatever won't have an abortion. Those are at least practical things we can do, because we're not going to be able to do anything politically anytime soon.
Clear pilled as far as the eye can see.
Yeah. But yeah. So does anyone have anything else to say? Is that it? Are we closing up here? Is any other? Do you have any more notes? 21.
Well, here, let me just double check. Let's do a back check of everything. Oh, by the way,
And
Vaush
I mean,
is,
Lambuda, if you're a secret oligarch, then you should become a subscriber on my subscribe star.
he's a Russian oligarch that owns like all the oil in Russia. um, but yeah, I mean, like, it's kind of. I actually misspoke saying that Vaush is like turning all these Zoomers into some kind of monster. I mean, he is kind of pushing them farther than where they are, of course, but he's just responding to market demand. He's very capitalist. He's just responding to the absolutely insane situation we have where people are able to just see awful things on the internet from an early age, and they just we like to pretend. Everyone likes to pretend. The boomers like to pretend that this is not going to have any effect on anything, and this crazy social media behavior and always being on your phone and never looking at human faces, this is not going to have any crazy neurotic effects on the kids. So yeah, the kids be crazy, and these people are just capitalizing on a monster, a spiteful mutant that already came to be. And all we can do is pray, because the progressive leaders are not so good, the progressive followers are not so good, and the Zoomers are not so good. So we have to try and be good, and be in communities, exit from politics, run from the hills. You get the gist.
I guess just to respond to one stupid comment, most comments are stupid, of course. I mean, not as stupid as my videos, but the issues with voting is not like whether or not it's a burden. The reason I wouldn't vote is not because of like the difficulty of doing it. I've voted many times. It's not. I don't care about taking a small time out of my life to do it. The issue is I don't know if it's the morally correct thing to do to vote for these awful parties. So that's the consideration. I don't think for any of us the issue is whether or not we're willing to take like half an hour out of our life to do it once every however many years. But yeah, so is that it, everyone?
I'm good.
21.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for watching. Make sure you pray the rosary.
Yeah. Make
Pray
sure
the rosary, or you're not on the team. I'm kidding.
Yep. But remember to subscribe to everyone's channel here. As I said previously, everyone has a channel. Subscribe to it. Remember to donate to Settlers Lament. Remember to pray the rosary. Remember to sign up for RCIA if you're not in the church. I don't know. Do all those good things and stop sinning.
I'm getting into the end of the process, Seller, so I'm proud.
Based. Goodbye, guys.